The plan for today, I'm actually going to plug in my computer while I talk. We are going to get a full stack project going today. I think the goal of this course, part of it was to have things that you can show to your, Leo, can you come here for 2 seconds? I don't know where the plug is. Great. So I think part of the goal of this course was that we can have things that you can show to your employers. Today we're going to be making Jeopardy, just the game Jeopardy. So it's going to be a full stack project. We're going to set up a backend server, which is going to serve our questions, which we're then going to, on the front end, turn into a game of Jeopardy with teams and whatnot. We're not going to be able to finish this in 1 hour. I've timed it. I can fly through, and I don't think that helps anybody. I think I want to take it slow. We're going to get the basic functionality set up, and then you guys can finish it, maybe add a feature, make the CSS look a little bit better. But we're going to all be live coding together today. So I'm just going to start from the top. I have an example set up here when I was banging this out. So the first thing we're going to need to do is make a repository. So I usually just hop into a terminal. And this is something that I would definitely put up on your GitHubs, guys. So me. Cool. So I've made a directory. We've opened it. This is looking okay. Cool. So one logical way that you can organize your full stack projects is simply by having, I'm going to initialize my repository here. If you guys get stuck today, by the way, please flag down Reed or Leo. I don't want you to get too far behind if you're hung up on some syntax. So first thing I'm going to do is open up a terminal in VS Code. I'm going to make a backend. So typically the way I like to do is get a backend with basic functionality working, work on the front end a little, work on the back end a little, and it all comes together at once. Some people say you just do one, then you just do the other, but we're doing it how I like to do it today. So I'm going to make a new folder, backend. Sometimes you'll see it called like server or something. Cool, so I have that folder open. Don't need any of these guys. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding stuff to it, but I have to cd into it first because I'm still in the root directory. Cool. So I need to start adding things to my, or with NPM. We're going to be using Express. So right off the bat, we know we're going to need Express. We know we're going to need TypeScript. We're going to need something called cores, which I'll explain when we get to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just npm install Express. It'll take a second. Every time we install something like that, we also need to install the dev dependencies, which are the types here, and TypeScript. So I'm going to get TypeScript going. And the types for Express. That's always -d is a dev dependency, and then @types / and then whatever the thing is. We're also going to need something called NodeMon. That's going to be a dev dependency. We don't need it, but it makes our dev experience a little bit easier. And then finally, we need cores, npm install cores. And we'll talk about that later. That's cross-origin resource sharing. Once we start getting into full stack stuff, we're going to need to handle that.
Can you show them all one more time quickly?
Yeah, of course. So we did Express, TypeScript, types for Express, NodeMon, and cores. I may be forgetting something. We'll learn real quick if that is the case. By the way, guys, I do have this entire repo for the finished project up on my GitHub, so you can take a look at that after. What's up?
I think it's the same thing as like last time, or when I was trying to do, React. I'm like having an error when I'm like trying to do npm install Express and stuff.
You may need to npx something. Leo's going to take a look. Has everybody else been able to install our dependencies? Cool. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize my TypeScript. So that's typically TSC. And just make sure you're in backend for this still. --init. So that's going to give us a tsconfig.json. This one is kind of useless. It's the boilerplate one. I don't like it. I'm going to drop the tsconfig that we'll be using for this project and that I really recommend you use going forward, at least as a good one, into the Slack here. Not that one. Back end. So I'm just going to drop this in the Slack real quick in the Software Engineering Bootcamp. So I would recommend using that as our tsconfig and just replacing everything that's in there, ripping it out, and saving it. One of the reasons why it's not going to work if you follow along and have a different tsconfig is the include and the outer are going to have the files in different places. So we've got our tsconfig going. Last thing I want to do is set up some scripts in our package.json. So comma right there, scripts. Let's see what it gives us. So I definitely want some of these. What's really important is this guy right here. I'm going to be using dev and watch today. So just to keep it simple for you guys, I'm going to get rid of that. So watch, if you remember, just sort of watches our project and constantly recompiles down the TypeScript whenever we make a change and save. Dev is just going to essentially let us run our endpoint and not have to rebuild the TypeScript every time. And we can make a change and our server will respond dynamically, so we don't have to constantly start and stop and start our server. So that's what we got for our scripts. I'm also going to drop this just so that you guys don't get hung up on typos into our Slack. So that'll be the package.json file that I'm using. Of course, there might be some differences in dependencies. I don't think that would be the case because we just installed the same things, but you guys are on different machines, so who knows. Definitely get the scripts. So the pretty normal file structure that we'll see here is if we make a new folder in backend called src. And then typically what we do, we make a new file in there called index.ts. This is going to be what's serving our file. This is going to serve our Jeopardy questions. So does anybody right now need any help with anything that isn't currently getting help?
Could you just pause for like 2
Let's take a breather. Yeah.
So it's the script, it's the JSON file stuff, and then the scripts, and then making a new folder? What did you do after the scripts?
After I edited the scripts in my package.json, I made a source folder. The source folder is just one level under backend. This is a pretty typical structure, is you put source, the source folder at the root of your directory for backend. And then right under source, typically we'll have an index.ts file. So that's going to serve as the entry point for our application. I'll give you guys a minute or two. Leo, did you get it?
Yeah, for some reason it put a colon in, the colon behind scripts, it put that in quotes. Don't know why that happened.
Oh, it's because I didn't. Okay. I've noticed that there's weird this stuff when it thinks it's marked down.
From Slack, I had the wrong quotation character.
We had that in our Slack when I tried to paste something to you. Okay, so that's good to know. Sorry, guys. So anyway, let's set up this index.ts file.
Wait, could you run back the commands real quick?
Of course. So Leo, we're installing Express, Cores, NodeMon, and all of the types.
Wait, you scroll to the Express. Wait.
I also on my on the repo for software engineering, if you go to today's lesson, it links to a repo that is on my personal GitHub, which is like a step-by-step on how to exactly run this project and build it. I'm going to just jump into the index.ts file. Are we okay for me to do that? Okay, yeah, please. I don't want to get ahead, so please take your time. Underneath NodeMon, I added cores, which we'll talk about for 2 seconds. Cool. I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds. If you copy from the Slack, the Slack might have like adjusted the formatting of the text.
You're copying it into index, or no? Where were you copying that into?
My scripts.
Yeah, into
The scripts go in package.json. You don't need scripts. You never need a script. It just makes it a little bit easier to run and test your project. So let's take a look at index.ts. Well, I want to make my app. So const app equals express. Cool. I'm immediately going to get an error there. So is my way of doing it, command period, add import from express. Cool. What I'm going to want to do now that I have a single line here, so let's take a look at our terminals. I have one terminal open. Typically when I'm doing full stack dev, I have like 4 terminals open. So you can just add this little plus button. Mine says fish. Yours will say probably like 0 shell or bash probably. You can add plus and get more terminals. So because I have my scripts, one thing I want to do is I want to watch this application. Every time I make a change, I want it to recompile down. So npm, make sure I'm in backend I am, npm run dev, or npm run watch. Cool. So already it's going to yell at me about I'm not using the app. That's fine. And we can see that we have a dist folder now. So I just leave this running. I'm never going to touch this terminal. Npm run dev. Okay. I always do this every single time. If you see where I'm at right now, I'm at dev's jeopardy. There is no package.json in dev's jeopardy. I need to navigate into the backend, cd backend, and then npm run dev. Something crashed. I think it's because I'm not actually using, my TypeScript's pretty type, and it sees that I make something that's resource intensive that I'm not using. It's going to yell at me about it. So we can fix that. That's not an issue. The next thing that I want to do is use express or use cores. I want to explain what this is to you without going into too much detail. Cores stands for cross-origin resource sharing. If I have an app and I'm running this express app on port 3000, that's my backend. I'm sorry, I'm going to be running it on 4000. And if I'm running my my React on 3000, now it's getting some data from a source that it isn't providing itself. This is a really heavily used way to attack websites. So what a lot of web browsers did was implement something called CORS restrictions or CORS policies, which basically say you can't go and get other people's data unless they have specified that you're allowed to do this. All this means for us right now is that we have to type app.use cores. That will solve all of our problems. Otherwise, we couldn't get anything from the server on our front end. Same thing. I'm just going to import from cores. Doesn't like it, so let me just do a import cores from cores. Could not find. Here's what's going on with that. Typically when you see could not find a declaration file, it's because I forgot to add the types. And right now I see try npm install save dev types cores. That's on me. So I'm going to open up finally one more terminal. npm install d for the types at types/cores. That should make it go away, I'm thinking. There we go. And if you're not sure what the types are for something, it's going to be in this format, I think like 99% of the time. You don't even have to check if it exists or not. It's probably going to be there. So right now what I want to do is I want to do app.get. I want to serve something on the main route. And then finally I want to have the app listening on port 4000. I'm going to code this out and let you guys take a look. I'm just going to console log. Great.
3,000 or 4,000?
Thank you so much. It's another mistake I constantly make. And then right here, it's yelling at us because request is declared and not used. Well, we're not going to need request here, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And here's what I want to do. I have a list of Jeopardy questions, which I have compiled for you guys. And by I mean ChatGPT made it for me. I didn't want to do that myself. So let me link that to you guys real quick. I'm just going to drop this in the Slack here. If this messes up, please let me know and I can link it to you in another way. It looks okay. We'll see. So I'm going to put that right under or right next to my index. I'm going to call it data.json. Just going to drop this in here, save it. So here's my data. Now I want to serve this data at this endpoint. When someone makes a GET request, I want them to be able to get the list of those questions. So instead of sending hello world, let me just make sure my app is running. My app crashed. You'll see this a lot, so you just Control C and restart it. I didn't save. That's because I have it on, again, pretty strict. If I'm declaring something that I'm not using, it's not going to compile for me. There we go. And if you guys want to mess with that strictness yourselves, obviously feel free. It's your config file. So here I'm going to use import path. So that is something that we will definitely be using here. Let me see if I can get this right first time. I usually don't. Res.send file. I'm going to send a file. So I'm going to do this. That looks right. So we mentioned this a little bit about path.join. It's just going to the directory name of where it currently is and then just saying index.html. And it's sending the file there. Oh, I don't want to save index.html. I want to do data.json. And serving data.json. So it's just concatenating those two strings and sending that file. Let's see if I got it right. I usually don't get things right the first time, so. It says server's running, get request, send file. Cool. So this is what's on my port 4000 right now. This is our Jeopardy content. Our backend is done. This is a super simple backend. Questions? We got 3. I'm just going to go left to right. Gordon.
Which command do you use to run it on the port?
So this app.listen.
Or is it just already doing it?
App.listen is what's allowing this app to listen on port 4000. Now I'm running this actual project with npm run dev. So if you're in a terminal and you navigate to backend and type npm run dev, that should run the project. I'm just going to questions. I'll let you guys look at this for a second or two. It's also not really a fair comparison because my GitHub Copilot has seen me do this project an hour ago and then yesterday as well. So I can just press tab and it's usually going to get it right, whereas you guys have to type it out. So I'm going to give it 30 more seconds on this. Is there any questions about what's happening on the back end while we all get caught up? What I will say, just a remark about cores. If you're doing full stack development, cores can be a nightmare. And even if you get it set up, like this is like a really simple way to do this. Imagine a more complicated application where we don't just have an Express server. We have maybe some server that's being served as middleware, or like a GraphQL supergraph or something before it gets to the Express endpoint. Now, how do you handle cores? How do you handle cores if you have a reverse proxy going on, like with Nginx? It can get really, really complicated and incredibly frustrating. This is going to work for our use case. So I'm going to move on to the front end.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What did you do with the categories?
So sorry.
The categories and everything?
Where did I put it?
Yeah, where did you put that?
At the same level of index.ts, data.json.
Got it, data. Got it.
Because of how I wrote my join, my path.join, if you don't have this in the exact same spot that I have, it will not work. Typically for debugging that, I usually just throw in like a console.log and log out what it thinks the path should be. And I go, wait, that's not right. And just look at it manually. So I'm going to get started on the front end. I want to give you guys at least some skeleton of a front end before we call it for the day. So I'm in my third terminal now. Those two terminals are just going to run. We're not going to touch those two terminals unless something crashes. So I'm at devs Jeopardy. We're going to do the same command that we've done a million times, npx. I'll link this in Slack. So npx create React app. We're calling our app front end, and it's using TypeScript. So that's going in Slack. And please make sure that you are not running this at the backend location, that you're at devs Jeopardy before you run this. Otherwise, it'll put your front end in your backend, which is not really what we're going for here. So I'm going to run this. This is going to take a minute or two. Again, please get caught up, ask any questions. We're just going to let this go. Yeah. It won't.
I copy and pasted the JSON, data.json
Yeah.
into a file, and it's all red.
There's probably a closing parentheses that's being missed somewhere. It's probably Slack bugged with it. Leo, if you have 2 seconds, can you take a look?
Did you do the quotation mark change? No, what's that? Like all the quotation marks are like the long format.
Yeah, Slack's being weird with the format of, it's changing what I paste into something different. Other questions while we're building our front end? Okay. Cameron, you need a sec.
Okay, what did you run? Sorry, I was getting caught up. Did you just run in?
I ran, it's in Slack. I ran a
Okay.
npx create React app. I called it front end. I said template TypeScript. So I'm going to navigate to the front end now. And we can see we can actually see I made a minor whoops. We can see here that I installed cores at too high of a cool. I installed cores at too high of a level. This isn't going to hurt anything, but you can see when the package.json isn't in backend or front end, I just did something at too high a level. I'm going to let it be for now. So if I look in the front end, I should have like a full React project in here. And we've seen this guy before. This is our app.css, app.tsx. To run this, npm run start. You can look in the package.json and it will show you that script that they already built for us. I'm just going to run this guy. npm run start. Looking good to me. Let's take a look. Don't need that. Cool. So we have our front end here on port 3000. We have our back end here on port 4000. We're doing full stack. For app, I'm just going to rip all this out like I usually do. I really got to start bringing a mouse. Using a touchpad is so hard to select this stuff. So we want to use browser router, just because that's sort of what we're doing for this class. Well, we got to add another dependency, so I'm opening another terminal. I'm making sure I'm in front end. npm install react router DOM. Yep, that's it. So that's going to be npm install react router DOM. I'm just going to drop that in Slack. Actually, Copying stuff is a nightmare. I'm just going to type it. Hope there's no typos there. And again, just make sure you're in front end when you do that. So let's check back on this terminal. Everything's looking okay. Cool. So right now in our app, I don't even want to use that CSS. I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to do div hi. Let's see if we're actually connected. Sick. So I'm going to add in this browser router now. Browser router, and then it goes routes, and then route. I'm just going to add these imports. So we've added a couple things from our React Router DOM library that we're using here. Path is just going to be, this is just going to be our home path. So when we go to localhost 4000, it should serve our Jeopardy application. We're just going to have a home page. Cool. So let me make this home page. If I save this, it will crash, by the way. So it doesn't know what home is. So in this source, let me give it 2 seconds for you guys to get that all.
But besides doing that, did you do an import somewhere? Or?
Yeah, so what I did was, let me press Control-Z a bunch of times. So these guys are not being imported. Right now it's just getting browser router, and let me just get rid of it. Let me get rid of all of them. Whenever I'm not importing stuff, I always command period, add all missing imports. Sometimes it grabs it, like if there are multiple things called query, it might grab the wrong query, and then you have to go in and manually do it. But for the most part, this is going to get them. Let me just save. It's going to crash because there's no home. So I'm going to make, again, this is pretty typical for a front-end structure. I'm going to make a pages directory and a components directory. So I'm going to add a new folder, pages, add new folder, components. So on pages, this is just going to be a one-page application for what we do today. You guys can add more if you like. We're adding a new file called home.tsx. So here's our home. We're not going to be passing in any props into this, so we can get rid of that. We can get rid of this. This is just using my snippets that I've talked about. Really recommend checking them out. It's going to save you some dev time. For now, typically what the very first thing I do is I return a div hello world, just to get something on my page here. Now, still a problem, it's because I'm not importing home, but home exists now, so command period. Command period. Add import. Cool. Hello world. The next thing I want to do is plug my computer in, because if this dies, this is a disaster. Without actually, Leo, where is the actual plug-in here? I was not able to find it. I'm so sorry.
My brain has stopped working.
You're kind of just done. 36 hours, no sleep. So I figured I was going to unplug something important if I did. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get this data from the back end. I don't care what it looks like. I just want to make sure that I have it. So that sort of sounds like a use effect to me. So I'm going to call this, but I'm not even going to set my types up yet. I'm just going to get one big chunk of data and stringify it. So const data set data equals use state null. Thank you, Mr. Leo. Import it. So this is a use effect. The idea is that on page load, we want to query our endpoint on the back end and get this data. Const fetch data equals async. So this has to be asynchronous, right? I don't want to deal with promises. I'm going to wrap this in a try catch in case we get errors. Yeah, so this is exactly right. Very important, don't do HTTPS. It's not a request that we're making like that. So we've done these before. We want to do a try, catch, and a finally for our basic queries to an endpoint. So catch is going to be if we catch an error. Well, we're going to need some way to store the error. So const loading and set loading is pretty normal, and then errors and set errors is typically the third one. You always want to start loading as to being true because it is loading on page load. So that's what we want to initialize that to, and const errors set null. And we'll get all the types going for these. So if we catch the error, let's make error be a string or null. I think that makes sense to me. So string or null. Null is no errors. String is the error message. And for this use effect, well, we only want to do this on page load. So we have to update our dependency array at the very end of this. So I just do a comma, empty dependency array. Now, if we catch this error, an error is of a special type most of the time. Sometimes it's not. So we do if error. So if error instance of error question mark, because we're doing the ternary operator. Is this right? So when we set errors, so error dot message we can see as a string. If we look over it, property error dot message, we see string. So then we'll be setting it as a string. Otherwise, if it's not an error, we don't really know what to do with that type of data. So we're just going to say an unknown error occurred. I think it's could be better, but for a simple application, this is fine. Then finally, set loading to be false. We're going to need to import this use effect. Awesome, no errors. We actually, and I always forget to do this, always need to call the function that we just wrote. So what do we call it? Fetch data. Cool. So ostensibly, maybe we have our data. Now I'm going to return three things here. So if loading, I want to return, well, I can't return in my data, it'll crash. We don't have the data yet. So if loading return, I'm just going to give a div. Loading dot dot dot, pretty normal. If errors not equal to null. Now errors could be a string, so if we just negate it, it's not going to do exactly what we want. So I'm just going to say if errors is not null, we know we have something. Return div. And errors is a string here, so we can do that. That's okay. We can just wrap it in brackets. And, otherwise, I want to return the actual data. Now here's a method I've not yet talked about with you guys, but I always use this when I'm making API requests and I want to make sure it works. So I'm going to throw the brackets around it to go into JavaScript mode. I'm so sorry that I use that term, which is not even the slightest bit technical, but it really is how I think about it in my brain when I'm writing. So it's JSON.stringify data. And what this is doing, cool, it worked. What this is doing is it's taking a JSON and just pretending it's a big string. That's it. So I'm able to display this on the page. So on our front end, we now have everything we need from the back end. We have it. Now we're just doing pure React at this point. React and CSS is going to be the rest of this project. So here's how I'm thinking about Jeopardy. I'm going to show you guys what I came up with. But typically when I think about Jeopardy, I think about a 5x5 grid. Each one has an ascending order of points, right? 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. And there's a category for each column. Now the two ways that I can think of doing this that make a lot of sense to me are either displaying this all in a grid, which we've done in CSS before for the Hoya Airlines project. Alternatively, I can think of this as a bunch of mapped columns mapped next to each other and flexed next to each other, where each column represents a category. So the category would be like science, math, programming, literature, whatever. I chose to do it that way. You guys can do it however you want and whatever makes sense to you. But I think if we continue for a little bit more, we're probably going to get to the point where we're locked into one or the other. So let's immediately get this going. I no longer want to return this JSON stringified data. I want to return something called a game board, is what I'm going to call my, just to be consistent with what I wrote before. That doesn't exist yet. We're about to write it. Actually, before I even write that, I want to get some types nailed down here. Types are typically at the top level of our directory. Types.ts. This does not need to be a TSX file because we're not doing any JSX in here. Yeah, I know. Export type. Well, let me see what we need. I don't remember. It looks like all of this data is, we have a key called categories, and then it's an array of a bunch of stuff. So if we look at each one, it looks like each one thing in categories, well, I'm going to call that thing a category. So export type category. So category has a name. And it also has questions, which is an array of, well, I'm going to call each of those objects a question. Questions equals question type. And I have to make that. So export type, we got to export these. Question type. So there's a question, there's an answer. It's a string. Looks like points is a number. And I've answered as false. Now, if you guys want to mess with this, I put this in here to make it a little bit easier for you. You probably wouldn't be setting up your backend like this. This was just to make it a smidgen easier. It's so that we have to do less prop drilling, is specifically why I have that there. What did I do wrong? Oh, dingus move. Do that all the time. So now we've got our types. We have a question and we have a category, and ultimately our game board, to me, looks like an array of categories. So let's make that game board real quick. Now on pages, I have a home page. I don't want that anymore. That was just for testing. Game board. Well, I'm probably going to have to pass it the data, is what I'm thinking right off the bat. I'm getting this data. Oh, and let me fix my types here. So loading and set loading, well, that's a Boolean. Data and set data, to me, this looks like an array of categories. Categories is going to be an array of categories. Or null. Category type, array, or null. And it's still mad at me because game board does not yet exist. So that sounds like it'll be a component. And the way I envision this is we have a game board. I'm so sorry, go on.
Do you think you'd send that, like home.tsx in the Slack?
Yes.
That has a lot of stuff that.
A lot of stuff going on there, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'd just be careful about like if it's dropping colons or something. But I think it should be okay. So for this game board, let me make a component real quick for it. Gameboard.tsx. So I think category, I was just going to call this categories, I think. Oh, it's doing the thing. Category type array. It's already got the import. Cool. So that's our interface that we'll be passing in. So we can just destructure that. Just call it categories. Keep it simple. So I'm thinking what we want to do is we want to take each category and map it to a column which I'm going to call the actual category. So in this project, we're going to map to categories, which is one column. Then in the category, we're going to map the array of questions to be a bunch of question components. That's how I conceive of this project in my head. And let me just show you real quick. Actually, no, I can't show you what it looks like even because I shut down my other project. So I'm thinking we want to return, and just here we can do I always do a div, in a div, just to start it off, game board, and make sure that this looks okay. Compile with problems. Oh, it's because I didn't pass it the data. So game board needs to get imported. And it's going to need, so if I press Control Space here, it'll tell me what I'm missing. Categories, data. Oh. Okay, and this is really tricky. Let's look at what this error is. Category type or null is not assignable to type category type. Well, when we define data, we said that it could be category type or null. Over here, we said that it has to be category type. So these types don't quite match. So what do? Well, if we look up earlier, we know that data has some relation with loading and errors. If there's so if data is null, either we're in loading or there are errors. So we would never get to this return statement. Better? We would never get to this return statement if data was null. So we can assert that data exists. Just like that. We say, I promise you, compiler, data exists. So the TypeScript is not going to complain. Now, cool. We're back on it. So ultimately, you can abuse this, and it can introduce errors if you abuse it incorrectly. But if you structure your methods correctly, shouldn't be too much of an issue. I want to go back to, what was I calling it, game board? I want to go back to game board. I don't need this div anymore. What I want to do is I want to map categories.map. So categories is an array of categories, so I'm going to map that. Category, an index, because we'll need that for the key. It's going to give us, well, shoot, let's have it give us just something called a category, single category. And we can define that. I will say that I know that we're going to want, for sure, key equal to index. That's just pretty standard practice. Let's make a category. So what are we giving to a category? What are we passing in as props? Sounds like, if we take a look back at our data just to get a feel for it, sounds like we're just passing in the category that we define in our types. So we can just call that category type. We'll need to import that, of course. And I'm just going to call this category. I'm going to destructure. So for each category, I'm thinking that I want to return the name of the category and then the questions. So I'm going to make that real quick. And I'm not dealing with useState or affecting them in any way. I just want to get them on my screen for now. So return div. Let's just do an H2 here. Category dot, my bad, JavaScript mode. Category dot name. Well, let me just see if we're all good on our add import. And then it's going to want us to actually include the category. So category. Let's take a look. I'm caught runtime errors. Cannot read properties of null. So I messed up. And now I have to figure out where. I'm pretty sure, just from experience, that I messed up in the use effect. Let me read this. Is it saying that the map categories is null? So I'm getting into a place that I shouldn't be getting into, and that is because I asserted it to be true. I have a logic error somewhere. I just need to find where it is. Because I want to get further along, and I don't want to spend time debugging this, which could take me longer than it should, let me copy and paste the one that I wrote like earlier. It should be functionally identical. I'm just going to drop this in. And I'm going to remove this thing called fetch data because it looks like I just did it a little bit differently. Set error needs to be changed to set errors. Oh, interesting. It wasn't that. Cannot read properties of null reading map at game board. Read properties of null. I might have called something the wrong thing. If I look at what my categories are called, category is a name and a question. So it should be name. And if I go to my category type, yeah, so category type has a name, which is a string. If I go back to category, it's a category type, so it should be .name. Let me real quick. Okay, so it's not a problem with category. Category index. If you see it, let me know. I don't see it.
Wasn't that rendering before?
It was rendering before I added category, which is why I was looking at category.
It was rendering all the categories?
No, I've never rendered a category. I was saying I just had a hello world in here, which is making me think that.
Aren't you passing the categories in home before it gets data back?
One sec.
Like data is an imperative, but before get data returns?
Get data should only ever, out of curiosity. I'm going to look at real quick. I know, it can't, the set loading false can't be there. It would have to be here. Not loading.
Try to do before you render the game board, just make sure the loading is not.
Yeah, I'm wrapping it in a.
I think your data is null.
I think that's what's going on here too, because it's giving me a null, which is why I was a little bit surprised. Not loading. Here we go. There was some logic error with this. I'm not sure what it is. I'm going to review it. It's on my GitHub. It looks okay, right?
I think you need to return them if loading.
Thank you. That is 100% what it was. Return, yeah, it's the. Now I think I can nuke this. Okay, dumb mistake. What Reed pointed out was that I was forgetting a return statement, so it wasn't actually returning a div. So this is why I mentioned that abusing the type assertion can get you in trouble. There you go. I had a logic error. I messed it up. Let's go back to category. Five categories. Looks good to me. Really quick, let's flex them. This is category. Let me make a category.css. Let's call this, I don't know. I did a CSS dumb thing. Flex direction.
Row. Or just.
Thank you.
Direction probably.
I'll look at this later. I don't want to get hung up on the CSS. We got other stuff that we have to work on. The last thing I wanted to do is actually get the categories out for you guys. So when we have an actual category, we want to do the category.name, and then we want to map category.questions.map. And I'm going to map that to something that I'm going to call a question, which I will make real quick. Lost it. TSX. For now, I'm just going to return. So the question is going to be of question type. I'm just going to call it I can even destructure it, which I may want to do. So question, string, answer, string, points, number, and answered Boolean. Right now we just want the points. For the question, we go back over here. It's going to want us to include answer is equal to question dot answer. We probably could have just passed it the question, then destructured later. What else do we have? Answered. Finally, points equal to question. And also key equals index. Let's take a look. Cool. So, got 2 more minutes. Each one of these questions is also going to contain, right now we're just showing the points. We can also have it show, do something like if answered, show the points, or if not answered, show the points. Otherwise, How do we answer it? Well, that's where we're going to starting needing to use reactor controller state. So I think we got not quite as far as I wanted to, and part of that is me messing around with CSS and null states and whatnot. Let me show you what I had this an idea of looking like real quick. So I'm going to turn off this project. I'm just going to Control-C out all these guys. And I'm going to run this guy, which just has a little bit of styling done. So I'm watching it. I'm now serving the content. I have a front end up and running. Let's take a look at what this front end looks like. I did not do media queries. So let me actually make this the right size. Here's what we got. You click on a question. First time it'll show you the question. Next time it'll show you the answer. I didn't bother with zooming way into the screen like it does in Jeopardy where it starts taking up the entire screen. And then, of course, you can add, this is the button. I know you guys can do this. It's just adding with a button. So the idea is that what we were able to make today is this top half, except without the onClick handler. That'll change the state. Now, I had two pieces of state. I had is answered. So what this looks like is, and this is just what the question is, question.tsx. So I have a handle click, which is basically saying, if you haven't even touched this before, the first time you click it, show the question, then show the answer. Then I have if answered, return the answer, return the question, or return the points, depending on which state is true. That's it. We were like 2 seconds away from getting there. Of course, it's got some CSS. So what we would like you guys to do, I have this exact code up on my GitHub, so you can finish the lesson for yourselves. I can continue talking about this and uploading it if you guys think that'll be helpful. Just let me know. But I think you've got enough code to make this happen for yourself. What we would like you to do, finish the project. As this is, you can look at mine for an example. Please reach out to me or any of the other instructors. I don't want to volunteer them, but ping me on Slack if you need any help. Ideally, we want you to finish the CSS, finish the actual implementation, and maybe add one more feature. Like, I don't know, maybe they can change their team names, or maybe you add a nav bar with an about page, or maybe you have it zoom in. Whatever you want to do, go nuts. But the idea is that this should be something that you can put up on your GitHubs yourselves and talk about with recruiters. So hopefully that'll help out. Please ping me. I'm going to call it there at 6 o'clock.